Who is Nika? The figure of the sun god Nika, also associated with that of Joyboy, is one of the most important key figures in all of One Piece, connected to every single major mystery in the story. But a lot of people still don't seem to understand just who or what exactly Nika was. I mean, yeah, Luffy transforms as Nika, literally becoming a living cartoon, but why? Well, Oda has been very scattered in his explanations, but he's already told us plenty enough about him, but particularly some of the most important details regarding Nika's identity rely on certain Japanese terminology that I've seen almost no one in the English-speaking community mention, ones that will completely change the way you view this character. So instead of theorizing or speculating on who Nika could be or any special aspects about him, today I want to try to simply stick to the facts, recap everything we know about Nika as a fact directly from Oda's own wording in the story, and explain the details that were lost in translation, which will help you get a better context of who Nika really is. There's a lot of layers to this, so please just hear me out until the end, as some stuff will only make sense with the context I'll provide with all the Japanese language by the end of the video. So, here is everything we know about Nika. One of the little pleasures in my life is my love for Japanese sweets and the amazing cuisine of their confectionery, but unfortunately it's incredibly hard to find anything of quality whenever I'm not in Japan. Thankfully, that's where the sponsor of this video comes in, as TokyoTreat&SakuraCo aim to deliver on the authentic Japanese sweet experience without having to even leave your own home. TokyoTreat focuses on the latest exclusive seasonal snacks in Japan, while instead SakuraCo focuses on more traditional snacks and tea sourced from local Japanese snack makers, but no matter which one you go with, you can't go wrong with any of their delectable treats. Each of these monthly subscription boxes also come with their own booklet describing the intricacies and history of the snacks, as well as any allergen information that you may need. Visit the link in the description below and use my promo code to get your very own TokyoTreat and SakuraCo boxes and get a taste of the beautiful snack cuisine from the land of Wano. Thank you again to TokyoTreat and SakuraCo for sponsoring this video. And one last thing, next week I will be uploading the complete One Piece timeline, going over the entire canon history of every date in the series in a colossal video, so subscribe so you don't miss that out. So for starters, Nika was originally presented as a figure who slaves from ancient times venerated like a god. Bearing the title of Warrior of Liberation, he was described as a legendary figure who was said would deliver people from their suffering by delivering smiles and laughter to their faces. It's said that Nika had the power to make people laugh through being silly and wacky, in the same way that it makes us laugh when we see him in the story. This is most visibly clear in Nika's own name, as Nika is one of the Japanese sound effects for laughter, one that can even be seen when Luffy first transforms into Nika. This joy meant so much to the slaves of ancient times, those who barely had any joy in their life otherwise, that they began to venerate this figure like a deity, calling it the sun god Nika and praying that he could one day appear to liberate them. Nika is described as a figure with a stretchy body literally made of rubber. There's a slight misconception Luffy has the power to literally do anything his imagination lets him to do, but while his powers do definitely affect the way he stylizes things around him, he is still made of literal physical rubber, which is why he's able to be immune against lightning, for example. The Japanese version states that Nika's key characteristic was that his body was made of rubber, one that attained greater freedom when awakened, and thus stretches around like a rubber hose cartoon. Nika is further described as having white hair, red eyes, and clad in white. This is particularly relevant as it is the color scheme also shared by the Lunaria race, as well as the color scheme attained by Solen transformations and Energy Stereo transformations, which will probably bear some connection to all of their origins in the Void Center at some point. Nika was also said to always appear to the beat of the drums of liberation, a funny rhythm that depicts in the pose of a party dance. A comparison has been pointed out to us several times. Nika in turn bears a really close connection, if not being the same person, as Joyboy, a historical figure from the Void Century. We know at present that Joyboy is seemingly more of a title, as Luffy has been described as a Joyboy as well, but this was a title first attributed to someone who existed in the Void Century, someone who was very influential within the D clan, the Ancient Kingdom, and its many allies. Zunisha was said to be a comrade, or literally nakama if we go by Japanese, of the first Joyboy, even having a personal internal monologue with him, and Robin also noted an apology in Joyboy's name being recorded on Fishman Island's remaining poneglyph. And of course, Roger attributed the One Piece treasure being connected to Joyboy in some form or way, meaning that Joyboy was very evidently a key figure within this ancient kingdom. 900 to 800 years ago, during the Void Century, you know there existed this kingdom which was described as immense, one that was incredibly technologically advanced, and one that had very progressive ideals of union and equality among all races. This kingdom was then opposed by 20 allied rulers from human kingdoms, who banded in an alliance to overthrow this kingdom, and thus then established a world government to rule the world. These 20 kings were commanded among them by King Nironaimu, who then became the king of the world. It was through Imu, though, that we were given confirmation of what many of us suspected for a long while, being that this immense kingdom was formed by the members of what is now called the D clan. We lack a lot of the finer details, but essentially the D clan was a group of people from many races and origins who operated within this ancient kingdom, and thus got themselves this D initial in their names, its true meaning bearing some important significance, though allies that didn't bear this D, at least publicly, existed too. These D-clan members believed in what they called the dawn of the world, an ideal of a hypothetical day in which the world is turned upside down and the world can be unified as one, which has led to many to widely believe that dawn could be the meaning of the D initial. One that would make perfect sense and almost feels really obvious, but that's still not confirmed, so we'll leave that speculation aside for now. Regardless, the imagery of the sun was very focal to these people, as particularly it's been strongly inferred that the sun was the mark of their people, of this kingdom, specifically a sun with 8 rays or spheres, which can be seen across their emblems in all of their cultures. This mark is seen present in the flag of Alabasta, in the icons of Shandora, the symbol of the Kolsky clan of Wano, the mark of the Sun Pirates, the Church of the Buccaneers, and well-known canon, even the people descended of the Burka in One Piece Odyssey. This is likely where the concept of the dawn connects with the imagery of the sun god. After all, the sun god was also revered by several of the allies pertaining to the kingdom, such as the Shandians mentioning a sun god, and the giants of Elbaf also praying to a sun god during the winter solstice we see in Big Mom's flashback, not to mention the Lunaria race of the god country also having a connection to Joyboy. The people of Fishman Island also believed in the ideal of all people living under the same sun as an ideal of equality and unity, the sun being a symbol of connection. As such, it's evident that in their ideals of liberation, many of the people of the D clan and the ancient kingdom believed in the dawn of the world and the sun god Nika as a figure that could help bring freedom and liberation to a broken world. However, as it has been told, few records remain from that time, so Nika's identity is much harder to prove now. It was described by Clover that the ideals of freedom of the kingdom was likely what the government feared the most, which is why they completely erased all traces of information from the Void Century. After all, people only die when they are forgotten, so completely erasing any information would ensure that those ideals from this kingdom would vanish. But ultimately, the desire for freedom persisted even across the ages, just like Vegapunk described, stating that much like Nika, people's wishes always find a way to be born upon this world. However, that's where all of this is thrown for a twist, because we've ultimately come to be revealed that Nika isn't real. A historical figure who was referred to as Joyboy did exist during the Void Century, but the figure of the sun god Nika, specifically the warrior of liberation, does not exist. It's been stated several times. We've been told directly by the government that Nika isn't real and never really existed, but, that may be easy to dismiss since, after all, this is being told by the government, who are prone to lying for the sake of erasing the truth. But then, the same was also said by those who wanted to believe in Nika, with Kuma stating that Nika is just a legend, someone who didn't really exist, instead preferring to believe in people who could make a real significant change in the world like Luffy. And when you think about it, going back to Who's Who original dialogue about Nika, even he mentions, did he exist or did they dream him up? Even describing Nika as simply a legendary warrior. But nothing has become more obvious of Nika not being a real figure than Luffy's own current devil fruit. Because we now know that Luffy has eaten a mythical type Zoan, and mythical fruits are a subsection of Zoans that let the user transform into creatures that never existed, directly described as being imaginary creatures, fantastical beasts that arose from human creativity rather than already existing within nature, at least within the present of their creation. As such, it makes sense that Nika was simply a mythological figure that people prayed to in ancient times. It's why they prayed that he could one day come and save them, because people in ancient times wanted to believe that Nika could somehow be real and rescue them from their suffering, whether it was out of denial or just sheer hope in desperation, in the same way that someone like Bonnie wavered about the fact of if it was too convenient for Nika to exist. But as Vegapunk explained to us, these wishes and hopes took form in reality because devil fruits are the incarnation of people's dreams, wishes, and desires, and Vegapunk even directly compared Nika's own existence to the way that devil fruits are born, claiming that people's wishes for someone like Nika to possibly exist resulted in his existence appearing upon the world in the form of a devil fruit. And so it makes perfect sense. Nika was originally a mythical figure that didn't really exist, but through the Hito Hitonomi model Nika, it was made reality, allowing Nika to exist in this world in some form by some user incarnating him. This would explain the correlation between the Joyboy of the Void Century and Nika, as Joyboy was seemingly the first user of the devil fruit and earned that title as a result of becoming Nika, as seen in the fact that Luffy is now also called Joyboy as well for having awakened the devil fruit once more. We know for a fact that the previous user of the Nika fruit, the first Joyboy who had so much influence in the ancient kingdom, is now dead, and the devil fruit was reborn, which went on the run for 800 years. The government attributed the fruit having a will of its own, as Zoan fruits seemingly possess a will, and the Nika fruit used that influence to somehow continuously run away and draw people towards it to help it escape. That would be until the present when it would choose Luffy, who ended up eating it. Whether that's out of destined fate, or simply because it believed in Luffy's dream, or if it really was all an accident, we don't really know, but it's particularly relevant that Zoan devil fruits can retain a will of their own. This is how Vegapunk was actually able to develop the technology to make items eat devil fruits, you know, like Mr. Four's Gundog Lasso or Spandam's Funk Freed Sword, as the will of the fruit would be the part coming to life within the inanimate object. This is also something that is seen within Zoan awakenings. It's been described that upon awakening a Zoan fruit, if the user's will isn't strong enough, then the will of the fruit will end up consuming the user, essentially taking over. It was explained this is what happened with the Impel Down guards, who, if you remembered, were described as awakened Zoan users all the way back in Impel Down by Crocodile in like 2009, and it was later elaborated that they are users who failed their awakening, thus having their consciousnesses consumed by the animals turned to brutish animal instincts. But in the case of a successful awakening, the user will retain control, but even then, sometimes aspects of the animal will manifest more directly. This is the reason why Luffy's personality has such a drastic change while in Gear 5. It's why he's always laughing even when the situation doesn't call for it. It's why he starts saying random things like bringing up the dawn of the world or even mentioning lyrics from Binks' Sake because the personality of Nika is resurfacing within him. Though of course Luffy still retains control because he still claims that he is Luffy, the man who will become the Pirate King. After all, Vegapunk mentioned how memories and core instincts developed through memories can remain within the bloodline elements, the genetic code of people, which would explain what is happening with Kuma as well, so it makes sense that the bloodline elements of the fruit would retain the will and personality of Nika that was created through the fruit, though we don't know exactly how that came to be, whether it was artificially reproduced or came to be from someone's own memories of what they believe Nika to be like. But ultimately, we still haven't fully answered our question. Who is Nika? Yes, we know he is a mythological figure that people in ancient times prayed to, and a figure that was incarnated by the first Joyboy, but even if he wasn't real, what was Nika actually like? And see, this is where the details that get lost in translation come to play in, because it was stated directly by Kuma that his dream was to become a hero like Nika. Interestingly, it was also stated that this wish is literally the reason why the buccaneer race, Kuma's race, was enslaved, which would imply that the original Joyboy could have been a buccaneer, and thus the government sought to eradicate and enslave the entire race to ensure that didn't happen again, completely ignoring the fact that becoming Nika isn't something tied by race or blood, but likely more inherited will. But it makes sense that the government would think more about bloodlines, while the real message is one of inherited will. This could even explain the buccaneer-sized hat found in Marijois, which would have fit a buccaneer perfectly, but this is only implied. We are entering into speculative territory again, so let's stick again to what we know as a fact. What really matters to us in this context is Kuma's own wording, because he stated that he wanted to become a hero like Nika. But you see, the Japanese word used here is hiro, which is literally the Japanese reading of the English word hero. However, like a lot of English words in Japanese, they have a slightly different meaning. Like, as a random example, the word cooler in Japan does not refer to a water cooler, but rather air conditioning. A lot of English terms have slight nuances in Japanese that change with cultural influences and thus have a slightly different definition in Japanese. So in English, we usually associate the word hero with someone who commits heroic actions, like a fireman or a savior of people, and that still applies both in the context of Kuma and the Japanese context, but in that language, the word hero usually refers more to the fictional cartoon kind, particularly what we call a superhero in English. In Japanese, this is usually abbreviated to just hiro, whereas the virtuous hero that helps people we think of in English with the word hero is usually just called by the kanji Japanese term of eiyu. This terminology is particularly noted and differentiated even within the One Piece world, with heroes, for example, like Garp or Kobe described as eiyu, Kaigun no eiyu, hero of the marines, while a superhero like Nika is described as a hero, like say My Hero Academia. Though the words can be interchangeable in their meaning a bit, talking to any Japanese person or even just a quick Google search will show you the different ways that people interpret these words. So essentially, Kuma said that he wanted to become a superhero like Nika, meaning that in other words, Nika was a fictional cartoon superhero. This becomes even more evident when listening to Kuma's descriptions of Nika in Japanese, referring to Nika as someone he idolized ever since he was a little kid, which explains why he told those stories to Bonnie kinda like a bedtime story as a kid, even though Kuma was fully aware that Nika didn't really exist. And when you think about it, it's pretty evident. The title of Nika, Warrior of Liberation, is a superhero title, especially since we have a direct comparison within the world of One Piece, being Sora, Warrior of the Sea, literally written word by word with the same kanji, Warrior of Liberation and Warrior of the Sea. Kaiho no Senshi, Umi no Senshi. Sora is a fictional cartoon superhero who embodies the ideals of the world government, and given all the connections we've had between Emu and the Sea Devil, which I've already talked about in length before, it would make sense if Sora embodied the ideals of the sea itself, literally Emu's ideals. But on the other hand, Nika is the Warrior of Liberation, a fictional cartoon superhero who embodies the ideals of freedom and liberation, the ideals of the ancient kingdom, the people of the D-Clan, and the original Joyboy in a sense. This would explain why Nika is a mythical figure, because he literally isn't real, he is a hero, a fictional cartoon superhero. And above everything else, this explains why Luffy becomes a living cartoon when awakening his fruit. As Kaido described, Nika seems like something straight out of a comic strip. It's cartoonish and ridiculous, yet it's those silly actions of his that make you laugh. Nika's original story was a tale made to make you laugh. He's a superhero who is meant to be silly and wacky, yet the joy that creates within you meant so much to those who knew nothing but suffering that they saw this figure as a salvation, venerating it like a god. Not out of fear, but out of appreciation because of how much it impacted their lives. Almost like how One Piece has helped impact our lives as well, honestly. This may also be why the first user of the Nika fruit, Joyboy, came to be known by that epithet, because Joyboy is a superhero nickname, much like Astro Boy, Superboy, or many other similar heroes. I guess Joy Man didn't embody the whimsical nature of Nika quite as well, so Joyboy became a fitting title for this superhero who delivered laughter and joy by embodying Nika. And so I'll leave you with one final thought. If Nika embodied by Joyboy is a mythical or fictional cartoon superhero originating from a story that only existed to make people laugh, then what was that story, that tale? Could that perhaps be the laugh tale associated to Joyboy that Roger witnessed? One that made him laugh just like we do when we witness Nika in the story? Well, that's still all speculation, but I'm sure Nika's own role in the story will become more and more evident as time goes on, as after all, Nika may not be real, may never have existed, but he still means so much to so many. Just like Luffy isn't real but has impacted and changed so many of our lives. These fictional superheroes may not have existed, but the impact they leave on the world could not be any more real.